My name is Natalie Webb. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my life, I believed betrayal would be obvious. Loud, messy, impossible to ignore. I thought if the man I married ever truly betrayed me, there would be something undeniable attached to it. A message left open, a name saved wrong, a mistake so careless it forced the truth into the light. But the worst betrayals don't arrive like that. They arrive quietly. A small detail, a pause in conversation, a moment where something feels off. And by the time you realize what you're looking at, it's already too late. I built my company from the ground up. Commercial flooring, nothing glamorous, just contracts, materials, deadlines, and long days that turned into longer years. I started at 27 with $14,000 and a second-hand truck that stalled if you didn't treat the gas pedal like it had feelings. By 38, I had 22 employees, 4 vehicles, and contracts worth more money than I ever thought I'd see growing up. I built it with discipline, with patience, with the understanding that if I didn't hold things together, no one else would. That instinct didn't stop at business. It extended to my family. My parents lived in a house I bought them. My younger sister, Danny, worked for me when she needed stability, which was often. And my husband, Julian, ran the office side of my company, scheduling, invoices, client communication. He was good at it. Reliable, or at least, I thought he was. We had been married 6 years. When he told me he was pregnant, no, when we thought I was pregnant, I believed it without question. Because that's what you do in a marriage that feels steady, not perfect, but solid enough that doubt feels unnecessary. The appointment was on a Thursday. He didn't say anything about it when he got home. Dinner was normal. Conversation was normal. Everything was normal. And that's what should have warned me. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter, looking out the window, coffee in his hand. Still, too still. How was the appointment? I asked. Good, he said. Everything's fine. He handed me a mug, and he didn't look at me. Julian always looked at me. 6 years teaches you those kinds of details. The small consistencies that become part of the rhythm of your life. You're not looking at me, I said. I'm tired, Natalie. It was the tone. Flat. Careful. Like every word had been rehearsed. Did something happen? I asked. He set his cup down, slowly. Then he turned to face me. And in that moment, I saw it. That expression. Like someone holding a door shut from the other side. And realizing they couldn't hold it anymore. I need to tell you something, he said. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Because whatever he was about to say, I already knew it wasn't small. It started a few months ago, he said. That was how he began. Not with the truth. With a softened version of it. He told me he and Danny had been involved. That it had gone on longer than he should have let it. That the baby might not be mine. That he was sorry. That he didn't know how it happened. People always say that. I don't know how it happened. As if betrayal is something that just appears. I listened to all of it. Every word. Without interrupting. Without reacting. Because if I spoke, I knew something inside me would break open in a way I wouldn't be able to control. When he finished, I asked one question. Where is Danny? He hesitated. At the yard, he said. She was supposed to start the Henderson job. I nodded. Okay. That was all I said. I grabbed my keys. And I left. The drive felt longer than it actually was. 15 minutes stretched into something else entirely. Something thick, heavy, like time itself didn't want to move forward. When I pulled into the yard, Danny was there, loading materials into one of the trucks. She looked up when she saw me, and I knew she knew. There's a certain kind of recognition that happens in moments like that. No words, just understanding. I walked toward her, every step deliberate, controlled. And then I hit her. Once, hard. She went down. For a second, everything went quiet. Then she tried to get up, and I hit her again. I'm not proud of that moment. But I'm also not going to pretend it didn't happen. Or that it came from nowhere. She had been sleeping with my husband for months, carrying a child we both thought was mine, smiling at me across dinner tables, taking paychecks from a business I built, while dismantling my life from the inside. I told her to get off my property. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. She just left. I stood there for a while after she was gone, alone in the yard, trying to feel something clear. But all I felt was stillness. I drove home. Julian was still in the kitchen, crying. He looked at my hands. Did you hurt her? I didn't answer that. Instead, I said, pack enough for a week. He blinked. You need to be out by tonight. Natalie. It's November, he said. It's cold. I'm pregnant. I know it's November, I said. I know you're pregnant. Pack. He stared at me like he was waiting for something else. An explanation. A breakdown. A sign that I was still the woman who would hesitate. But that version of me had already ended. Where am I supposed to go? He asked. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man I had built a life with, at the man who had chosen my sister over me. Call Danny, I said. He flinched. Good. I went to my office, closed the door, and sat down at my desk. Outside, I could hear him crying, moving around, packing, making calls. And inside, I opened my laptop, pulled up the company projections for the next quarter, because the work doesn't stop. At 11:14 p.m., I heard the front door. Then silence. I walked into the living room. His key was on the counter, not placed, set down, like something permanent. I went to bed, set my alarm for 5:30, and closed my eyes, knowing that when I woke up, everything would be different. I didn't cry the next morning. That's the part people expect you to say, that you woke up and broke down, that the weight of it all finally caught up to you in the quiet hours between night and morning. But I didn't. I woke up at 5:30, turned off my alarm, got out of bed, and went to work. Because grief, when it's sharp enough, doesn't always look like emotion. Sometimes it looks like focus, like narrowing your world down to only the things you can control. And at that moment, the only thing I could control was what came next. Saturday morning, I called my attorney. Preston Hale had handled my contracts for 7 years. He knew my business, my habits, my expectations. More importantly, he understood that when I said something needed to be done, I meant immediately. I need to come in Monday, I told him. There was a pause on the other end. How much needs to change? He asked. Everything. Silence. Then, calmly, all right, Monday, 8 a.m. Bring everything. I will. He hesitated just slightly. Can I ask what happened? I didn't dress it up. My husband got my sister pregnant. Another pause. Shorter this time. Monday, he repeated. I spent the rest of the weekend organizing documents. Not because I had to, because it gave my hands something to do. My will. Insurance policies. Business ownership structure. Property documents. Everything I had built. Everything I had trusted other people to stand inside with me. By Sunday night, it was all stacked in clean folders on my dining table. Ordered. Contained. Unlike everything else. Monday morning, Preston's office. He didn't waste time. He never does. We sat across from each other, my documents spread between us, like a map of a life that no longer existed. Let's go piece by piece, he said. I nodded. Divorce, he started. We can file immediately. Given the circumstances, especially with the paternity question, this should be straightforward. File today. He made a note. The will, he continued, currently names Julian as primary beneficiary, your parents secondary, your sister tertiary. Remove all of them. He looked up. Not surprised. Just confirming. All? All. He nodded once. What would you like instead? A charitable remainder trust. I'll decide recipients later. He wrote it down. No hesitation. No judgment. Just execution. We moved to the business insurance. 2.1 million policy, he said. Julian is currently listed as primary beneficiary. Change it to the trust. Done. Then the house. My parents live in the property you purchased 4 years ago, he said. Title is in your name. No formal occupancy agreement. I remember. What would you like to do with it? I leaned back slightly. For a moment. Just a moment. I thought about everything that house represented. 34 years of my father working in a warehouse. My mother stretching every dollar until it felt like it might snap. The promise I made to myself that when I had enough, they would never struggle like that again. And then I thought about my sister, sleeping under that roof, after what she had done, without consequence, without anyone stopping her. It stays in my name, I said. No transfer, no future inheritance tied to it. He nodded. Understood. Your sister, he continued. She's currently working under contract for your company. She's terminated, effective immediately. For cause? Yes. He paused. What cause would you like documented? I didn't hesitate. Conduct detrimental to the business and to the principal. A slight flicker in his eyes. Professional understanding. He wrote it down. She'll understand what that means. By the time we finished, there was nothing left untouched. Every tie, every assumption, every safety net, gone. Not out of anger. Not anymore. This wasn't anger. This was correction. The paternity test was my decision. I ordered it at 16 weeks. Non-invasive. Clinical. Efficient. The way everything needed to be now. I didn't ask Julian for permission. I didn't discuss it. I simply had it done. Because I needed facts. Not apologies. He called 11 days later. I was at my desk, reviewing quarterly projections. The same way I had been the night Julian left. Results are in, Preston said. Tell me. A pause. The child is not yours. I closed my eyes. Just for a second. Probability? 99.96%. Your sister is the father. Of course she was. Of course. I see, I said. Natalie, what do we need to do next? Another pause. I'll forward the results to Julian's attorney. Do that. I hung up and went back to work. Julian hired an attorney. Briggs, ambitious, aggressive, optimistic in a way that suggested he hadn't yet understood who he was dealing with. His opening demands were extensive. Partial ownership of the business, claim to the house, spousal support. He argued that Julian had contributed significantly to the company's growth, that he had been more than an employee, that he had been a partner. I let Preston handle it, because this wasn't a conversation. It was documentation. Preston responded with facts. Julian's salary history. $64,000 a year. Market rate. No equity. No partnership agreement. No ownership stake. He had been compensated. Fully. And then the paternity results. Attached. Filed. Delivered. The demands disappeared within a week. Just gone. Like they had never existed. Because once the truth is documented, there's nothing left to argue. The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom drama. No emotional speeches. Just paperwork. Signed. Filed. Closed. Julian walked away with $22,000. His personal savings from before the marriage. His car. His belongings. Nothing else. Not the business. Not the house. Not the accounts. Nothing I had built. Nothing I had protected. Danny. Her termination letter was delivered by certified mail. Midweek. Formal. Cold. Precise. I didn't speak to her again. Not then. Not after. There was nothing left to say. People think moments like this feel powerful, like reclaiming control, like standing at the center of your life and resetting everything that went wrong. But it didn't feel like that. It felt quiet, like walking through a house after a storm. Everything still standing, but nothing the same. I didn't celebrate. I didn't reflect. I didn't even slow down, because slowing down meant feeling. And feeling wasn't something I could afford yet. What I didn't fully understand at that point, what I would only realize later, was that the betrayal hadn't just been between me, Julian, and Danny. It hadn't just been an affair. It hadn't just been a lie. It had been something larger, something that reached into every part of my life, something that would force me to make a decision I hadn't planned for. Not about my husband, not about my sister, but about the people who were supposed to stand beside me, no matter what. My parents, and what they chose to do next. My parents called the Saturday after Julian left. My mother first. Her voice was soft in that careful way people use when they know something terrible has happened and they want credit for approaching it gently. Natalie, she said, we heard what happened. I'm so sorry. Are you okay? No one asks that question because they expect an honest answer. They ask it because it makes them feel humane. I'm managing, I said. There was a pause. Then she said, Danny came here. I leaned back in my chair. At that point, I was in my office, door closed, one hand resting on a folder Preston had sent over that morning with updated estate drafts inside. I didn't say anything. She's staying with us for a little while, my mother continued. She needed somewhere to go. Somewhere to go. I looked out the window at the back lot behind my building, at one of my crew leads directing a forklift with the same calm hand motions he always used. Routine. Order. Instruction. The whole world continuing as if mine hadn't just split open. She's staying there, I said slowly, in the house I bought for you. Natalie, in the house I paid for in cash. She's your sister. I let that sit there between us. Heavy. Useless. Like a sentence dragged out of some old family handbook people quote when they don't have the courage to say what they really mean. I know exactly what she is, I said. My mother exhaled shakily. We're not choosing sides. That was the first moment I understood something important. People always say that as though neutrality is noble. It isn't. Not when one person has done something cruel and the other person is standing in the wreckage of it. At that point, neutrality is just cowardice wearing a polite face. You already did, I said. Natalie, that's not fair. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because fairness had become such a ridiculous word in the span of 48 hours that hearing it out loud felt surreal. She had nowhere else to go, my mother said. She had Julian, I said. She had the man she slept with for 7 months. She had the father of her child. She had options. What she didn't have was the right to be comforted under my roof. My mother fell quiet. Then, softly, we didn't know what else to do. That was true, probably. And somehow that made it worse. Because what I needed from them was not brilliance, not strategy, just loyalty, just the basic moral instinct to say, no, not here, not after what you did to your sister. And they couldn't do it. I'll call you later, I said. Then I hung up. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I had heard enough. That afternoon, I called Preston. The house, I said. All right, he said immediately, as if he had been expecting this call. I want the arrangement formalized. In what way? Month-to-month tenancy, market rate, documented, no more informal understanding, no more family assumptions. He was quiet for half a second. Then, I can draw that up. Do it. He pulled up the property details while we were still on the phone. Market rate for that area is about $16.50. Fine. Do you want to explain the reasoning in the document? No. All right. That was one of the things I valued most about Preston. He understood that once I had reached a decision, explanation was rarely useful. The rental agreement went out the following week. My mother called me the same day it arrived. I could hear the paper in her hand by the sound of her voice. Natalie, what is this? It's a rental agreement. We can't pay $1,650 a month. I swiveled my chair slightly and looked at the spreadsheet open on my screen. Payroll, materials, upcoming receivables. Numbers. Predictable. My parents' combined monthly income was $2,840 between Social Security and my father's pension. I knew that because I had helped structure their budget when I bought the house. I know your income, I said. There was a long silence after that. Not shocked silence, hurt silence. As though knowing their finances and still sending the agreement felt colder than anything else I had done. Maybe it was. Are you punishing us? She asked. No, I said. That answer was true. Punishment implies emotion. This was boundary. This was evidence. This was me putting legal shape around something that had always been built on trust and proving, very clearly, that trust no longer existed. You let Danny stay there, I said. You made that choice in a house that belongs to me. So now the arrangement is formal. If you want to stay, you pay rent. If you don't, you can make other plans. You know we can't just make other plans. I said nothing, because the cruel part of me wanted to answer, neither could I. Neither could I make other plans when I found out my husband had been sleeping with my sister. Neither could I make other plans when the future I thought I had collapsed in my kitchen over coffee. But I didn't say it. Some injuries don't improve when spoken aloud. They just spread. You have 30 days, I said. Then I ended the call. They signed the lease. Of course they did. What else were they going to do? The first month they paid in full. The second month they were $400 short. My mother called. Her voice sounded smaller that time. Can we send the rest next Friday? The full amount is due under the agreement. Another silence. Then a quiet, all right. They paid the remaining $400 the next week. The third month, full again. The fourth month, my mother called and asked whether there was any flexibility. By then, I had learned through a cousin I never asked for updates from that Danny was still living there and contributing almost nothing. Apparently, she was exhausted, emotional, overwhelmed. The pregnancy was hard. Julian was in and out. Promises, excuses, chaos. The kind of chaos people create and then act wounded by. No, I told my mother. Natalie, I want to be very clear about something, I said. I did not set that rent because you're poor. I set it because you took in the woman who helped destroy my marriage, and you did it in my house. The rent is documentation. The rent is the part of this situation no one gets to reinterpret later. She started crying then, softly at first. Then openly. I sat there and listened without interrupting. I don't know what that says about me. Maybe that I was colder then than I am now. Maybe that I understood tears were not the same as accountability. Maybe both. Around month 5, Danny found warehouse work. Temporary. $17 an hour. She gave my parents $400 a month, which still didn't close the gap, but made the story they told themselves feel more manageable. I heard all of this indirectly. That was how information moved after a while. Through cousins. Through old neighbors. Through industry overlap. Through the strange way families leak news, even when no one is speaking directly. I never asked. But facts arrived anyway. And once facts arrive, you either ignore them or account for them. I accounted for them. Always. 6 months after the divorce finalized, I left. Not for a vacation. I have never been a vacation person. I left because a development group in another region had been talking to me for months about expansion. They were building out a broader property management portfolio and needed reliable contractors. I flew out, reviewed the numbers, walked the sites, looked at the growth projections, and said yes. People love to make personal reinvention sound poetic. It wasn't. I didn't leave town because I was chasing healing. I left because work was still the one language in my life that hadn't betrayed me. I opened a second location, leased a building, hired a site manager, spent 4 months moving between both operations until the structure was solid enough to support itself. Then I shifted my base. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I had Preston handle everything. Rent collection, legal notices, document questions. Anything they needed to say could go through him. I was gone. Year 1, the new location cleared $380,000 in revenue. I reinvested $200,000 into equipment and staffing. Hired 4 more people. Started conversations with 2 more property groups. At home, things got worse. Danny lost the warehouse job in month 7. Attendance issues, apparently. That didn't surprise me. Consistency had always been her least favorite kind of responsibility. She moved out of my parents' house after that and rented a room somewhere else. The $400 disappeared. My parents called Preston. He relayed the message. "What would you like me to tell them?" he asked. "That the rent remains the same." He didn't comment. Just made a note. Later, I found out my father had started doing handyman jobs for neighbors. Small repairs. Fence posts. Light fixtures. Loose cabinets. $25 an hour on a back that had given out when he was 54. He was 67 then. I sat with that information for a while. Longer than I expected to. Because anger is simple when it stays abstract. But it becomes more complicated when you picture your father climbing a ladder with a body that already paid too much for a lifetime of labor. I sent Preston a message that night. Lower the rent to $1,200. He wrote back, "Do you want me to say why?" "No, just process the change." So he did. And that was the first mercy I extended to them. Not forgiveness, not even softness. Just adjustment. Year 2. The second location cleared $890,000. Julian had the baby. A girl. Danny was present for the birth, according to information that reached me whether I wanted it or not. She had retail work at that point. $14 an hour. Inconsistent. Child support was set. Payments were inconsistent too. That didn't surprise me either. There are some people who experience consequences and change. And there are other people who experience consequences and simply become more resentful. Danny had always belonged to the second category. I did not think about their daughter often. When I did, it was only to acknowledge one hard truth. She had done nothing wrong. She was innocent. But innocence does not create obligation where betrayal destroyed it. She was not mine. And whatever life Danny and Julian built around the wreckage they created was theirs to carry. Not mine. Year 3, I opened a third location. 47 employees across all sites. $2.4 million in annual revenue. I remember standing in the new office one evening after everyone had gone home, looking out over a warehouse full of ordered materials and labeled shipments, and thinking how strange it was that my life had become larger exactly where my personal world had become smaller. Success can do that. It can expand your capacity while hardening your center. At home, my parents had adjusted. My father's handyman work had become something close to a neighborhood business. $800, sometimes $1,200 a month if he had enough jobs. My mother took on bookkeeping for a local church office a few mornings a week. They survived. That matters. I want the record to show that clearly. They survived. Not comfortably, not easily, but they survived. And somewhere inside that fact was a lesson for all of us. They had lived for years under the assumption that my help was permanent, unconditional, woven into the background of their lives like electricity in a wall. Then it was gone. And they learned to live differently. So did I. By the end of the 3rd year, I understood something I had been too angry to name before. Distance had not healed me, but it had clarified me. I knew exactly what my presence had been worth, exactly what my labor had funded, exactly how much of my family's comfort had rested on the quiet assumption that I would always keep providing no matter how I was treated. That assumption was dead now, and maybe it needed to die, because love without limit had nearly ruined me. I came back in year 5. Not for closure. Not for forgiveness. And definitely not because time had softened anything. Time doesn't soften betrayal. It just gives you enough distance to decide what to do with it. I came back because Preston Hale called me. It was a short call. "Your father's health isn't good," he said. "Not critical, but not something you should ignore." There was a pause after that. He didn't push. He never pushed. "I thought you should know." "I appreciate that," I said. And that was it. No emotion. No follow-up questions. Just information. But that night, I didn't sleep well. Not because I was overwhelmed. Because for the first time in a long time, something felt unresolved. I drove back 3 days later. Not to the house. Not at first. Old habits don't disappear just because time passes. I went to Preston's office. Reviewed a few documents. Checked on some filings. Talked through nothing important for about 30 minutes. A buffer. Then I left and drove to a diner about 10 minutes from my parents' neighborhood. The same one my father used to take us to when we were kids. I sat in a booth near the window, ordered coffee, and called my mother. "I'm in town," I said. "Diner on Maple." She didn't ask anything else. She just said, "I'll be there." She arrived 22 minutes later. Alone. She looked older. Not dramatically, but enough that you noticed it if you had been away long enough. She sat across from me and didn't say anything at first. Just looked at me, like she was trying to reconcile the version of me she remembered with the person sitting in front of her. "You look good," she said finally. "I'm fine." She nodded. Then, after a moment, he's not. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup. Tell me. And she did. Early stage heart failure, medication, restrictions, no heavy lifting, no ladders, no long hours, which meant no more handyman work, which meant less income, which meant everything tightening again. I asked questions. Specific ones. Dosages, doctor names, treatment plans. Because facts are easier than feelings. They always have been. He asks about you, she said quietly. Every day. I let that sit. Then I asked something I had thought about more than once over the past 5 years. Did he ask about what Danny did every day? She looked down at her hands. And that was answer enough. I'm not asking to be cruel, I said. I'm asking because I want to understand the scale. On one side, what she did. On the other, what I meant. Which one carried more weight? Her voice was barely above a whisper. You always carried more weight, but you didn't act like it. Tears slipped down her face. We didn't know how to choose. I leaned back slightly. Choosing wasn't complicated, I said. You just didn't want to live with the consequences of making the right choice. She didn't argue. Because there wasn't anything to argue with. That was the truth. He wants to see you, she said. I know. Will you come? I stared at the table for a moment. Then I said, I'll think about it. She nodded. That was more than she had expected. I could tell. I paid for the coffee. Left more cash than necessary because she would have argued otherwise. Then I walked out, sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, and stayed there longer than I planned. Because this was the part no one prepares you for. The part after anger, after distance, after success. When you're faced with the question of whether or not to step back into something that broke you, knowing it won't ever be the same. I drove to the house. The same one. The same beige walls. The same driveway. Everything familiar and completely different. I walked in without knocking. My mother had always hated that. Said it was rude, but it had always been my house. And that fact had never changed. My father was in the living room, sitting in his usual chair. He looked smaller, not just physically, like time had taken something out of him that it hadn't before. He looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, he didn't move. Then he stood up, slowly, carefully. But he stood, because that's who he is. Because even now, even like that, he was still my father. Sit down, I said. I'm standing for this, he replied. Of course he was. We stood there, looking at each other. 5 years of silence between us. 5 years of choices, of consequences, of things that couldn't be undone. I'm sorry, he said. Simple, direct. I'm sorry for all of it. I nodded once. I know. He swallowed. I should have thrown her out the day you told us. I should have stood next to you. I didn't. No, I said, you didn't. I've thought about that every day. 5 years is a long time to think about something you could have done in 5 minutes. He closed his eyes briefly. I know. We sat down after that. My mother brought coffee, the same way she always had. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. We talked for 2 hours. About his health, about my business, about the neighborhood, about things that mattered, and things that didn't. Because when you've been apart long enough, you don't jump straight into resolution. You rebuild, piece by piece, carefully, like you're working with something fragile. Because you are. I didn't forgive them that day. I want to be very clear about that. There was no moment where everything reset. No emotional breakthrough. No clean ending. Forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's a process. And I was only at the beginning of it. But I stayed for dinner. And the next Sunday, I came back. And the Sunday after that. Not because everything was fixed, but because some things were worth rebuilding, even if they would never look the same. Danny was never there. Not once. My mother made sure of that. When she comes by, she told me quietly one afternoon, we tell her not to. I nodded. That's the only way this works. I know, she said. And to her credit, she enforced it. Some lessons come late, but they still count. I adjusted the rent that year. $800 a month. Not because they earned it. Not because anything had been repaired. Because my father's medical bills were real. And fairness, real fairness, requires adjustment when circumstances change. But the structure remained. The documentation remained. The boundary remained. My will still doesn't name them, not directly. But I added something. If I die while they're still living in that house, they have a legal right to stay there for the rest of their lives. A formal life estate. Not generosity. Just correction. For what should have been there from the beginning. The business insurance still goes to the charitable trust. That hasn't changed. Some things don't need to. Danny, she's somewhere. Working. Not working. In and out of stability. Her daughter is 4 now. Julian is still in the picture. Inconsistent. Predictable in his inconsistency. I don't follow it closely. Information still reaches me. But I don't go looking for it, because it doesn't belong to me anymore. None of it does. I started with $14,000 and a second-hand truck. I built something real, something stable, something that no one else gets to take from me. Not anymore. Not ever again. I broke my sister's nose. I threw my husband out in November. I removed my entire family from every document that tied them to my life, and I disappeared for 5 years. I did all of that. And if you're asking whether I would do it again, the answer is yes. Not the violence. I'm not proud of that. But everything else? The boundaries, the distance, the refusal to pretend that betrayal doesn't have consequences. Yes, I would do that again. Because now, they understand the value of my presence, the cost of losing it, and the difference between love and access. Every Sunday, my father stands up when I walk into the room. He doesn't have to. I've told him that more than once, but he does it anyway. Because now, he understands something he didn't before. Respect isn't assumed, it's earned. And sometimes, it's earned back. Slowly, painfully, one Sunday at a time.